Chiwetel, such a pleasure to speak with you. I really enjoyed the film, and it's a real pleasure to be speaking with you. And I know you're from England, so I was curious on your read from this, but this felt like a very American story because we see this bright young kid, and we see him, have go through a lot of trauma, but he gets some wonderful opportunities. But then we also see all the issues that come with the American dream and America that take that away from him. So, how do you kind of feel about that read on the story?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I think that is, what happened. I feel like there's something that is very universal as well about Rob's story. I think it's very specific in the United States. It's very specifically an American story, but it also speaks to things about social mobility that I think people engage with around the world, and the sort of dynamics of family, the responsibility to family, and the responsibility of family to the individual, as well as the responsibilities of an individual to oneself. I think that these things are so human, basically, and so fundamental to our humanity. And so I was struck in Jeff Hobbs's book about his roommate at Yale. I was struck, I think, primarily by the sort of the humanism of it, the idea of a person looking at the life of their friend and trying to understand what happened to them in a wider context. And then in investigating Rob's journey, understanding all of those familial bonds that tie the relationships to family, the relationships to community, the relationships to friends, and what Rob was striving to do in all of those spaces, I thought really had something that connected the experiences in maybe a much more minor key, but because Rob is an extreme version of some of those things, but I felt connected to the experiences of so many people, around the world.
And I think this is a real credit to the film and obviously the book. But I saw some of the discourse around when the book came out, and people kind of seeing uh, Rob have like the takeaway from some people was that Rob had two different lives. Like he was Sean to one audience and he was Rob to the other. But your film, I feel like you don't walk away thinking that. You see a very whole individual, a very complicated person. So I would love to just get your thoughts on, this not being a person with two separate lives. It's just a very complicated person that was, did some incredible things and, was forced into making some bad decisions as well.
Yeah, I think I didn't want to make a film about code switching because I actually find the term code switching and what it evokes actually to be quite limiting. I don't think that is, especially when it's applied to the experiences of Black people, which is sort of it's become a term that has been used to describe in a shorthand way some of a sort of racialized dynamic, which I just think is minimizing. So I wasn't interested in that, and Rob he never represented that as far as I could see. So yeah, some people sort of jumped on that. He went to Yale, but he was from this impoverished kind of area. Consequently, it's a story about these two. And to me, that never rang true to me. Rob's the real strength, or what was really interesting about Rob to me was that he was always himself, that he could encapsulate both of these parts of his life, these different and complicated spaces. And he could wear his do-rag in the lab and be a Yale student studying molecular biophysics and biochemistry and be accepted within that context with some struggles, don't get me wrong, but broadly accepted within that context, still himself and authentic to himself and authentic to his experiences, and then go back into Orange or East Orange, back to his friends, back to his community, and be himself. And they recognize him as somebody who's going to Yale, but is themselves and is always Rob. And I felt like that is true of Rob. It's authentic of his experience. And that is actually authentic of a lot of the experiences of people who find themselves in these worlds of social mobility. The complications aren't about code switching. The complications are about how you navigate and manage the different expectations on you at at different points in your life because of the numerous systemic choices that you're having to make, the numerous pressures that are put on you. In Rob's case, it's a pretty extreme example of all of these, but it still highlights the point, I think, that a lot of people experience.
Yeah, that's wonderfully put. My last question for you. I love that both you've directed two films, and both of them are about these. There's a through line of these incredibly gifted and smart Black children who care deeply about their community. And this one goes in a much more tragic direction. But what do you like about that shared DNA in these two films?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that I really responded to these two stories about family, ultimately, about family, about the challenges and about the responsibilities that individuals find within these dynamics. I think I see myself in these stories a lot. So in The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind and in Rob Peace, I see elements of my story. Certainly things that kind of trigger a deep and emotional response from me. There are things that I have considered and things that I think about. There are also things that I think aren't necessarily depicted in the way that I want to talk about them in cinema. So I feel like there's a desire to see stories that kind of encapsulate more of a rounded experience of people's lives, especially within the context of these communities. And and I suppose I was moved by feeling that Rob in this case was very unfairly treated by the kind of wider sort of media response to the events that occurred. I felt that there was a very sort of judgmental element that was part of how Rob's story was reported and thought of, and I definitely had a desire to kind of sort of see what that looked like once you had a much more three-dimensional understanding of his experiences, with the hope that I think would encourage a better sort of allyship, a fuller sort of allyship.
Yeah, you do a great job of depicting that. Chiwetel, thank you so much for your time today, and congrats on Rob Peace. It's really wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.